February 1943, in the Tunisian hills, marked the first time German troops encountered the full weight of American artillery. What began as a routine defensive action near Sidi Bou Zid quickly spiraled into a brutal demonstration of industrial warfare unleashed completely. American howitzers rushed across the Atlantic, brought with them not just fire, but a method. Mathematical, relentless, and unyielding entirely. German communications officers reported disbelief when shells landed almost simultaneously across wide fronts, ignoring terrain and defying calculation effortlessly. It was here that the German 10th Panzer Division first felt the impossible accuracy of time-on-target missions firsthand. Instead of observing incoming rounds and adjusting, they were buried instantly beneath a synchronized wall of explosive power. Veterans who had fought the Red Army at Kharkov were stunned by how quickly American artillery located and obliterated positions. Horse-drawn German batteries, forced to maneuver slowly through rocky passes, never escaped the reach of mobile Allied guns altogether. Reports written in field journals called American barrages ghost storms, unpredictable but devastatingly real once their thunder fell. The Afrika Korps, already stretched by fuel shortages, now faced an enemy whose firepower was chained to massive logistics. And behind every round fired lay the strength of Detroit and Pittsburgh, feeding cannons faster than Germans could reposition entirely. Some officers believed at first that American barrages were accidental miracles, until they saw the same pattern twice again. Within weeks, tactical adjustments were discussed, but no doctrine could counter the velocity of mechanized shell delivery itself. Tunisia became a classroom, not just for American troops learning war, but for Germans relearning what fire superiority meant. Every crater left behind told the story of a nation that built its guns not for harassment, but domination. In later interviews, General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim admitted that American artillery had changed the tempo of desert warfare forever. The shock of Tunisia was not just in its defeat, but in realizing a new kind of enemy had emerged. One whose battlefield language was spoken in steel, calculated in seconds, and delivered without hesitation or mercy across continents. On February 1943, in the Tunisian hills, marked the first time German troops encountered the full weight of American artillery. What began as a routine defensive action near Sidi Bou Zid quickly spiraled into a brutal demonstration of industrial warfare unleashed completely. American howitzers rushed across the Atlantic, brought with them not just fire but a method, mathematical, relentless, and unyielding entirely. German communications officers reported disbelief when shells landed almost simultaneously across wide fronts, ignoring terrain and defying calculation effortlessly. It was here that the German 10th Panzer Division first felt the impossible accuracy of time-on-target missions firsthand. Instead of observing incoming rounds and adjusting, they were buried instantly beneath a synchronized wall of explosive power. Veterans who had fought the Red Army at Kharkov were stunned by how quickly American artillery located and obliterated positions. Horse-drawn German batteries, forced to maneuver slowly through rocky passes, never escaped the reach of mobile Allied guns altogether. Reports written in field journals called American barrages ghost storms, unpredictable but devastatingly real once their thunder fell. The Afrika Korps, already stretched by fuel shortages, now faced an enemy whose firepower was chained to massive logistics. And behind every round fired lay the strength of Detroit and Pittsburgh, feeding cannons faster than Germans could reposition entirely. Some officers believed at first that American barrages were accidental miracles until they saw the same pattern twice again. Within weeks, tactical adjustments were discussed, but no doctrine could counter the velocity of mechanized shell delivery itself. Tunisia became a classroom not just for American troops learning war, but for Germans relearning what fire superiority meant. Every crater left behind told the story of a nation that built its guns not for harassment, but domination. In later interviews, General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim admitted that American artillery had changed the tempo of desert warfare forever. The shock of Tunisia was not just in its defeat, but in realizing a new kind of enemy had emerged. One whose battlefield language was spoken in steel, calculated in seconds, and delivered without hesitation or mercy across continents. By late 1943, American artillery was no longer just powerful, It was intelligent, transformed by the birth of fire direction centers entirely. These hubs of mathematical precision turned raw artillery crews into orchestra conductors, directing steel in perfect synchronization always. Hidden behind ridges or nestled in forest clearings, FDCs processed data faster than any enemy could react effectively. They took reports from forward observers, calculated wind, terrain, and shell trajectory, then unleashed calibrated death within seconds decisively. Instead of individual batteries firing independently, whole units coordinated to deliver unified destruction against designated targets every time. German officers trained in slow, linear methods were shocked by how swiftly American guns could shift fire zones. Where once it took 10 minutes to arrange a barrage, now it was done in less than 3 minutes routinely. The mathematics behind it was simple in theory, but revolutionary in execution, fed by slide rules and discipline constantly. Every shell was not merely fired, it was planned, and every crater mapped with terrifying accuracy unseen before wartime. The fire direction center was the brain, the guns were its fists, and the shells were its striking will forever. Even without radios, runners and wired telephones relayed fire requests faster than German scouts could identify firing positions. The result was not a roar of chaotic firing, but a calculated thunderclap of mortars and howitzers. This system turned warfare from reaction into prediction, from guesswork into scientific certainty, and from chance into engineering entirely. And as German troops would discover at places like Monte Cassino and St. Lo, math could kill with chilling precision. When the first wave of synchronized fire fell, there were no scattered patterns, only the crushing weight of inevitability. For the Americans, artillery was not just support, it was strategy, a doctrine born from industry and intellect combined. Fire direction centers proved that wars were no longer won by numbers alone, but by information and timing meticulously. And every shell that landed marked not chaos, but the exact moment when calculation became the deadliest weapon of all. The method that German infantry feared most was not the size of the guns, but their terrifying synchronization entirely. Time on target was the term, a doctrine that turned minutes into mortal traps and seconds into judgment across battlefields. It meant every shell, from every gun, would land on the target at the exact same instant precisely always. No warning whistles, no scattered incoming signs, just sudden impact, as if the earth itself had been detonated underneath. The secret was timing, calculated backwards from the moment of desired destruction to each cannon miles behind combat lines. Even howitzers firing from different ranges and calibers would be ordered in a sequence mathematically aligned to perfection always. For German soldiers used to hearing the distant boom before the blast, the silence felt like betrayal by nature itself. One corporal wrote that he barely got down before half his platoon vanished into mud and air beneath steel weight. 3 minutes was all it took, less time than a cigarette break, less time than a shouted command to pull back. Every gun involved in the barrage had already chosen its victim long before the first shot was ever fired. In Tunisia, it turned trenches into graves. In Normandy, it dissolved entire defensive lines before tanks even rolled forward. This wasn't random destruction, but rehearsed obliteration, and Germans marveled bitterly at the Americans' industrialized way of killing efficiently. For the Wehrmacht, fire was something to be endured. For the U.S. Army, it was something to be orchestrated completely. The precision required trust in clocks, calculations, and crews who could load, aim, and fire like extensions of one machine. The result was terror, not born of noise, but of instant devastation. Nothing to see, nothing to dodge, only death waiting. Even officers who survived spoke later of feeling hunted by an enemy they could not even hear approaching anymore. Time on target was not just a tactic, it was a psychological weapon, turning every battlefield moment into uncertainty. It taught the Germans that the deadliest artillery was not the loudest, but the one that arrived without warning completely. By late 1944, American artillery had not only mastered timing, but redefined what it meant to strike a target entirely. The invention that shattered German morale was the variable time fuse, known simply as the proximity fuse among Allied soldiers. Unlike traditional shells that required a direct hit, These new rounds exploded when they neared their target at once. Using tiny radio transmitters and circuitry, the shell sensed proximity and detonated in mid-air, showering lethal fragments downward always. This meant that dugouts, foxholes, and trenches no longer guaranteed safety. Every inch of cover became vulnerable quickly. German commanders at the front reported shock as trees burst overhead, shredding camouflaged units beneath invisible explosions entirely. Even aircraft feared the shells, as flak gunners needed no longer guess altitude or angle with old precision methods. The science behind it came from American labs, where physicists wedded wartime urgency to peacetime innovation under pressure. Every proximity shell fired was a testament to industrial adaptation and willingness to rethink centuries of artillery practice completely. For frontline infantry, the difference was survival. No more waiting for shells to miss, they simply could not miss anymore. In the Ardennes, during the Battle of the Bulge, these fuses turned forests into death zones for advancing German units. What once took hundreds of shells could now be achieved with dozens, multiplying firepower without increasing burden or cost. Captured reports showed stunned reactions from German officers, unable to believe a fuse could decide life from mere distance. Some called it witchcraft, others science fiction, but all agreed it made American artillery apocalyptic in both method and result. The Wehrmacht could no longer outdig, outhide, or outmaneuver a shell that killed from meters above its target always. In the end, the proximity fuse turned the entire battlefield into a grid of calculated lethality, governed by invention itself. It was not just a weapon, but a warning. The age of mechanical warfare had merged fully with electrical precision in combat. No longer did the artilleryman aim for where the enemy stood, but simply near enough to ensure none escaped alive. Autumn 1943, North Africa, and later Europe, mobility became the deciding factor between survival and destruction for artillery units. Motorized American artillery could relocate within hours, while horse-drawn German batteries required days of exhausting animal labor altogether. This logistical advantage translated into tactical flexibility, allowing rapid concentration of fire where it mattered most under shifting battle conditions. Roads, fuel depots, and mechanical workshops turned factory output into battlefield mobility that German planners could not emulate efficiently. Horse teams consumed fodder, required rest, and slowed retreats, making artillery withdrawal a perilous, time-consuming operation under enemy pressure. American logistic trains carried spare barrels, replacement breech blocks, and ammunition in quantities that overwhelmed local supply nodes instantly. Forward observers could request shifts of fire and receive precise barrages within minutes due to pre-planned supply routes and crews. Conversely, German units often delayed counter-battery fire because horse convoys could not traverse cratered roads after bombardments without immobilizing further. Mobility also influenced ammunition types carried, enabling Americans to utilize proximity fuses, while Germans conserved limited stocks for value targets. Railheads and motor pools became prime objectives, their capture or denial shaping where guns could be emplaced and sustained effectively. American engineers paved roads, built bridges, and improvised pontoon systems to keep batteries moving across rivers and devastated terrain. German reliance on armored train corridors or horse lines created choke points easily targeted by mobile Allied fire and air interdiction. Supply flexibility allowed Americans to mass artillery for breakthroughs redistribute to follow exploitation phases without pause or supply crises. German crews improvised solutions under fire, but improvisation could not replace engine-driven sustainment and its cumulative wartime advantages. Logistical superiority enabled preemptive positioning of batteries to deliver time-on-target strikes before enemy formations could react appropriately. The impact on German troops was stark as mobility divorced safety from static defenses, turning retreat into vulnerability. Accounts from veterans recount how rapid Allied repositioning made ambushes obsolete and left defenders exposed to massed barrages with minimal warning. Logistics also affected training, as American crews drilled relocation procedures until movement became second nature and errors reduced significantly. In mobile warfare, maintenance cycles shortened due to forward workshops and spare parts convoys embedded within advance columns always. German field manuals later lamented that scarcity of motor vehicles transformed tactical choices into logistics-driven compromises under relentless Allied pressure. Ultimately, the argument was simple. Mobility multiplied industrial output into battlefield effect, making numerical parity irrelevant without comparable sustainment. From Tunisia through the Ardennes, the logistical gap converted American artillery into an unstoppable operational engine that redefined modern combat. Every motorized battery that rolled forward delivered not just shells, but strategic choice, and that choice kept German defenses on edge. On June 1944, over Normandy hedgerows, fragile L-4 grasshoppers patrolled low, offering commanding observers vital sight for artillery adjustment. These light aircraft, adapted from civilian designs and flown by keen spotter pilots, transformed targeting by providing immediate corrected fall-of-shot data reliably. Forward observers marked targets with smoke, radioed coordinates to fire direction centers, and watched as synchronized barrages adjusted within minutes precisely. L-4 crews learned to fly dangerously low, enduring flak, gusts, and enemy small arms to maintain visual contact over contested ground. Pilots communicated concise descriptions using pre-arranged grids and reference points, relaying bearing, range, and effect with professional brevity and urgency. Their aircraft acted as mobile eyes, spotting concealed enemy batteries that maps and aerial photos had failed to reveal commanders promptly. Observation pilots often carried handheld boards and pre-printed map overlays enabling instant triangulation, improving shot correction speed dramatically during moving engagements. Ground artillery units drilled endlessly with airborne spotters until coordination became instinct, minimizing wasted shells and maximizing destructive efficiency under conditions. German countermeasures adapted slowly, deploying camouflage and decoys, but they could not negate the core advantage of instant observer-driven fire correction. In campaigns from Sicily to Normandy, L-4s provided continuous reconnaissance that allowed artillery to shift fires before enemy formations could disperse. The psychological impact cannot be overstated, as German infantry reported a pervasive dread, knowing that overhead observation often preceded devastating barrages suddenly. L-4 pilots were sometimes junior officers or volunteers, yet their training emphasized meticulous reporting, calm under fire, and rapid decision-making. Observers mastered map grids, range estimation, and the art of concise radio reporting, enabling fire direction centers to compute firing solutions instantaneously. Forward air observation and artillery formed a lethal partnership where information from light planes translated into lethal shell placement within minutes. Maintenance crews on the ground synchronized ammunition supply with airborne spotting schedules, ensuring that the right fuses and calibers were always available. The result was devastating efficiency, with fewer rounds required to achieve effects that had previously demanded disproportionate expenditure and time consumption. Veteran accounts recall nights when unseen patterns of shell bursts carved rhythms into earth, signaling coordinated destruction orchestrated by unseen airborne spotters. German attempts to silence spotters with anti-aircraft guns met immediate countermeasures from Allied fighters who protected observation craft relentlessly always. Training emphasized coordination drills that synchronized pilot signals with battery adjustments, reducing human error during chaotic engagements across varied terrain quickly. The L-4's contribution extended beyond direct fire control, providing reconnaissance on enemy movement, supply columns, and concealed artillery positions critical for planning. In short, the sky-eyed grasshoppers turned vulnerable ground units into lethal, networked nodes under protective observation and devastating fire control. On December 1944, the Ardennes forest erupted under the weight of the heaviest American artillery concentration ever assembled in Europe. The German counteroffensive struck like a winter storm, but it was answered with an avalanche of steel from dug in Allied batteries. Over 4,000 guns, from 105mm howitzers to massive 240mm siege mortars, unleashed over 1 million shells relentlessly. For the first time, artillery fire became not just support, but the primary weapon holding back the last German gamble entirely. American units cut off, surrounded, or retreating called downtime on target strikes so dense they turned woods into wastelands immediately. Veterans remembered trees exploding into splinters, snow turned to vapor, and frozen soil lifted like ocean waves under bombardment forcefully. German columns, already short on fuel, found roads cratered into oblivion before they ever reached planned assembly points nearby. One German lieutenant wrote that it felt as though the forest itself betrayed them, shaking and breaking at every step. Even tanks, long relied on for breakthrough, became steel coffins once proximity-fused shells burst inches above turret armor completely. Artillery forward observers, often cut off by fog or snow, relied on aircraft, radios, and instinct to summon destruction swiftly. Fire direction centers, operating around the clock, rerouted guns from quiet sectors to hot zones in minutes, shifting entire battles overnight. The logistical train behind the guns was unbroken, hauling tons of ammunition across ice-coated roads with mechanical ruthlessness continually. Horse-drawn German batteries, unable to move or dig in fast enough, were obliterated before they even registered enemy fire mission calls. The battle showcased not just American power, but coordination, infantry, engineers, supply crews, and artillerymen operating as one war machine cohesively. In Bastogne, surrounded paratroopers used artillery strikes like lifelines, calling down barrages that shattered assaults meters from their lines. The final German push stalled not through shortage of courage, but under the certainty that every movement invited calculated annihilation. When the snow finally settled, the Ardennes stood as a monument to industrial fire superiority and the futility of last stands. 1 million shells had answered the last roar of the Wehrmacht in the west, proving artillery's role as king of battle forever. From the battered remnants of regiments once known for discipline and steel resolve came voices of disbelief and bitter awe entirely. German soldiers who faced Soviet tanks and British bombers now described American artillery as a monster that erased the world instantly. In after-action reports and captured letters, they spoke of barrages that arrived without warning, without pattern, without hope. What we feared most was not the infantry, but the moment when the earth would open up beneath us relentlessly. Obergefreiter Hans Müller wrote that the ground seemed alive, heaving under explosions so perfectly timed they defied human instinct. Others recalled how foxholes turned into traps because shells burst overhead, sending iron rain everywhere without mercy or pause. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer stated that American barrages seemed guided by unseen eyes, correcting faster than any countermeasure could stop. German troops who once relied on their famed fieldcraft and camouflage found themselves hunted by math, machines, and constant coordination. One veteran of Monte Cassino admitted that even in ruined abbey walls, he could not escape proximity-fused hellfire overhead. The most frightening aspect, they confessed, was the speed, the silence before the storm, and the sense of being watched always. German artillery officers envied the mobility and timing of Allied guns, writing bitterly about their own horse-drawn delays and shortages. In a 1945 debriefing, an officer remarked, "They fought with industry, and we answered with endurance, and endurance was not enough." The phrase "steel rain" passed among foxholes, not as metaphor but as lived reality, where the air itself became weaponized. Some tried to counter with rapid retreats or night movements, but American spotters and fire direction centers adjusted before they blinked. There was no trench deep enough, no bunker strong enough, no hill safe enough once the artillery lines found range. One corporal summed it best. Their guns did not just kill. We felt them think, calculate, and decide our fate with every barrage. Fear did not simply end with battle. It marched back with the survivors, etched into their memories of collapsing Earth. The German testimony remains a haunting record of how logic, logistics, and lethal intent fused into one terrifying battlefield machine. By 1945, American artillery had evolved into the most coordinated, devastating, and logistically unstoppable firepower machine the world had witnessed so far. Its success stemmed not only from superior industrial output, but from revolutionary fire control systems and flexible doctrine that amplified every barrage. Forward observers linked by radio could call precise strikes within minutes, turning dispersed batteries into a single thunderous fist of coordinated destruction. The development of the M2 105mm howitzer, provided infantry divisions with organic firepower previously unimaginable in earlier campaigns from North Africa onward. Mass production ensured more guns, more shells, more spare parts, and critically, more trained crews to sustain operations through relentless logistical planning. Time-on-target techniques synchronized distant batteries, so every shell arrived simultaneously, overwhelming enemy trenches before counterfire began, and morale collapsed instantly. German officers later admitted American artillery neutralized assaults faster than any Panzer Reserve could restore broken lines under constant steel rain always. In Normandy hedgerows, barrages cut gaps for tanks, proving firepower could substitute for terrain advantage where visibility trapped maneuvering troops completely. During the Ardennes, rapid artillery shifts blunted surprise offensives, buying hours for infantry to regroup under snow and bitter winter skies. Pacific Island campaigns highlighted amphibious fire coordination, with naval guns linking seamlessly to army spotters ashore despite jungle heat and distance. Artillery also shaped post-war doctrine, influencing NATO standards and Cold War readiness across Europe's divided plains, facing Soviet armored thrusts inevitably. Computing advancements born from ballistic tables eventually fed into digital fire direction centers decades later, replacing slide rules and guesswork forever. The psychological effect of unending bombardment fractured enemy cohesion before bullets even crossed no man's land, shattering resolve and communication instantly. Medical studies showed fewer friendly casualties when overwhelming artillery preceded assaults, validating firepower as life-saving strategy beyond pure destructive intent alone. Logistics trains of trucks, railcars, and depots became arteries feeding the guns across continents, proving supply was ultimate force multiplier always. Veterans recalled the earth shaking, a physical reminder that industry and mathematics now ruled battlefields more than individual heroics ever could. Museum exhibits today display plotting boards, rangefinders, and radios that democratized lethal precision, turning gunners into scientific artisans worldwide forever. American artillery taught future armies that coordination, not caliber, defined dominance in modern war across every contested valley and shore. From Korea to Vietnam, the Red Legs carried forward lessons of mobility, communication, and overwhelming preparatory fire against jungle and hilltop foes. Even precision missiles owe lineage to survey crews who once triangulated targets with slide rules under incoming shells in muddy forward positions. Thus, the legacy of American artillery endures as a testament to organized willpower, reshaping conflict while questioning the human cost forever remembered.